The HOA thought they finally had us cornered. They called the cops, smugly waiting to see my wife dragged out in handcuffs. But as the flashing lights filled our driveway, they had no idea who they were messing with. Because my wife isn't just another neighbor, she's the county sheriff. Let me take you back to how this entire mess started. My wife, Emily, and I had lived in this quiet suburban neighborhood for about 4 years. It was the kind of place where every lawn looked like a showroom model, and every fence line was perfectly measured. On paper, it looked peaceful, but the homeowners association, the dreaded HOA, made sure that peace came at a price. They had rules for everything: how tall your grass could be, what color your shutters could be, even what kind of car you parked in your own driveway. At first, Emily and I tried to play along. We kept the yard neat, kept noise down, and waved politely at the neighbors. But some people just aren't satisfied, unless they feel in control. And in our neighborhood, that person was Margaret, the self-appointed HOA Queen Bee. You know the type, always lurking, always ready to pounce on the tiniest infraction. One day, Margaret showed up on our porch holding a clipboard like she was the President of the United States. "Your trash cans were left out past noon yesterday," she said with a smirk, "and that's a violation." I stared at her, confused. I'd literally just moved them that morning. But Margaret wasn't here for explanations. She wanted power, and from that day on, it felt like she had a personal vendetta against us. Every week, there was a new complaint. Our mailbox was too shiny. Our car was too dusty. Even the flowers Emily planted, red tulips, were deemed inconsistent with neighborhood standards. Seriously, tulips. At first, we laughed it off, but then things escalated. Margaret started showing up unannounced, snapping photos of our house, threatening fines, and even sending letters saying we'd be removed from the neighborhood if we didn't comply. Now, here's the kicker. What Margaret didn't know was that my wife Emily wasn't just some ordinary woman with a full-time job. She wasn't just someone who'd get intimidated into compliance. She was the county sheriff. But Emily didn't flaunt it. She never walked around in uniform, never bragged about her badge. She just wanted to come home and relax like everyone else. Still, Margaret was determined to push, and one evening it all came to a head. It started with our truck. I had parked my old pickup in the driveway while I cleaned out the garage. Nothing fancy, just an old Ford that had been in my family for years, but apparently, in Margaret's perfect little world, my truck was an eyesore. That same night, she stormed up to our porch again, yelling about how it had to be gone by morning or we'd be fined. Emily calmly told her she was overstepping, that the HOA bylaws didn't prohibit pickup trucks, and that she needed to leave our property. But Margaret didn't take no well. The very next morning, we woke up to flashing lights in our driveway. Police cars. Margaret had actually called the cops on us. I peeked through the blinds, my stomach sinking, while Margaret stood proudly on the curb with her arms crossed like she'd just solved a murder. I rushed to the door, but Emily stopped me with just one look. "Let me handle this," she said. She walked outside in her jeans and t-shirt, coffee mug in hand. As the officers stepped out of their cruiser, "Ma'am, we received a call about a vehicle violation," one of them said, clearly uncomfortable. Margaret cut in before Emily could respond. "That's right, officer. These people are breaking HOA regulations. That truck is not allowed here. I demand you ticket them and have it towed." Emily raised an eyebrow. "A violation of HOA rules is not a criminal offense," she said coolly. The officers shifted uncomfortably. You could tell they knew this was ridiculous. But they had to follow procedure since a complaint was made. Margaret wasn't satisfied. She pointed directly at Emily, her voice rising. "You're obstructing justice. She's lying to you, officer. Do your job and arrest her." That was the moment. Emily let out the faintest laugh. She reached slowly into her back pocket, pulled out her wallet, and flipped it open. The silver star of the county sheriff's badge gleamed in the morning sun. The officers froze. Margaret's face dropped like she'd seen a ghost. "Ma'am," one officer said carefully to Emily, "you're the sheriff." Emily nodded. "Yes, I am. And this," she gestured toward Margaret, "is a case of false reporting and harassment. I'd suggest you note that in your report." The color drained from Margaret's face as the realization set in. She hadn't just called the cops on a neighbor. She'd called them on the head of county law enforcement. But Emily wasn't finished. She stepped closer to Margaret, lowering her voice just enough so only a few of us could hear. "If you ever trespass on my property again, if you ever file another false police report, you won't be dealing with HOA fines. You'll be dealing with criminal charges. Do I make myself clear?" Margaret stumbled over her words, her usual smugness gone. I didn't know. That's the problem," Emily said firmly. You think your HOA rules are the law, but I am the law in this county. And you just wasted police resources because you don't like my truck. The officers couldn't help but smirk as they packed up their notepads. We'll file this as a false report, one said. Sorry for the trouble. Sheriff the cruiser pulled away, and Margaret stormed back toward her house without another word. For the first time since we'd moved in, she didn't have the last laugh. But here's the best part. Word spread quickly. By the end of the week, every neighbor knew what had happened. Margaret, the self-proclaimed HOA dictator, had been publicly humiliated by the very person she thought she could bully. She stopped patrolling the neighborhood with her clipboard. She stopped sending passive-aggressive emails, and for once, she actually left us alone. In fact, a few weeks later, Margaret wasn't even HOA president anymore. She stepped down, though everyone knew she'd been forced out after embarrassing the board. Apparently, the HOA didn't want to risk any more lawsuits after Emily had pointed out just how far Margaret had overstepped her authority. That's for us. Well, that old Ford truck is still sitting proudly in our driveway. Sometimes I catch neighbors glancing at it and smiling, as if it's become a little symbol of freedom, and every time I see it shining in the sun, I can't help but think back to the look on Margaret's face when she realized the truth. So the next time you hear about an HOA gone mad, remember this story. Because sometimes, karma doesn't take years. Sometimes, it arrives in the form of flashing lights, a badge, and one very powerful lesson for those who think they can control everyone else.